Hello, I'm back again for whoever's tuning into this. I had to remake this video for a number of very good reasons. I guess I'll start with one. I made it on Memorial Day to pay a tribute to soldiers that were killed on Fort Drum in 1996, which I didn't know that until the day before Memorial Day. I discovered that. Spirits of three of these soldiers were visiting me while I was at Fort Drum 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And it was not something I looked for. It wasn't something I wanted. But these three young men appeared to me in spirit form in their army uniforms every day while I was in a certain area of the woods as a tank platoon sergeant training with my unit. And they sought me out. I didn't seek them. I don't seek out spirits. And I know I'm lighting candles and all this, but this is a tribute and a memorial to the fallen. And I, being a retired Army sergeant, and they appeared to me, I feel like they were counting on me to tell their story. So that's reason one why I'm doing this again. Reason two is I made a couple of big mistakes in a telling of the first one that I'm going to correct in this. And reason three, I've never had this happen before, but when I posted that video, some of you watched it, and if you watched it through, it's rather long. If you get to about minute 20, around about minute 25, it goes black. You can still hear the audio, but you can't, it just goes black. The video cuts out, though the audio continues on to the end. And I don't know why it did that. I looked at the original digital, I'd say film recording that I still have, and there's nothing wrong with it. It plays through perfectly right to the end, the video. So I remade it again, and lo and behold, it just blacks out. And I can't understand it. I cannot answer that. There may be an answer for that. Obviously there is an answer for it, but I don't know what it is. And I made it again. I made it 3 times. I made it, and it just blacks out. And then I look at the original video, and there's nothing wrong with it. It plays right through. So that video didn't want to work. And I got to tell you something. I got really creeped out making that. I made another mistake in that. Another mistake I made was I brought race into it. One of the 3 soldiers that I saw was black, and I should have just left that out of it. And one of them looked Latino or Italian. I don't know, darker complexion. I figured he was Latino or Italian. I couldn't tell which. Dark hair and dark complexion. Latino or Italian. And the other guy was blonde-haired, fair-skinned. So the only reason I brought those things up was to validate when I found these guys after 20 years, I found them and who they were. Because they spoke to me. They told me enough about who they were that I could narrow it down, who I was looking for. And you'd think it would be easy to find. But I made a mistake in bringing up race, and I shouldn't have done that. And I'll tell you, some creepy things happened that night that really kind of unnerved me, and maybe just kind of, I unlisted the video. You won't find it on YouTube. I took it down because it was full of mistakes. I took it down because the video would black out halfway through. No reason why. I don't know why. But also, when I started bringing up one of the men's race, I was just sitting there, I wasn't moving, and my dog was behind me in the living room. And a candle just fell off the table. And I mean, it didn't roll off. It was sitting well on the table. It wasn't lit. It was one that was out. It was like well on the table, standing up. And it wound up on the floor as soon as I brought up this guy's race. And here's a video clip of that event. Was black. Yeah. Oh, that fell. I'm creeping out now. Right. And that was no accident. And I woke up that night at 3 in the morning, distinctly feeling like one of these soldiers was here. And I didn't feel threatened, but I felt that he was definitely not happy about the video. That he was very upset about the video. And I don't get those kind of feelings too often. And I don't like even telling this story. Honestly, I don't like doing the spiritual stuff. I live alone in life. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm not making any money off this. I'm all alone. My dog could care less if I make these videos. You know, and I'm not doing this to entertain anybody or show off, you know, spiritual bragging rights or whatever it might be. I'm not. But I'm a sergeant, and they appeared to me, these soldiers, years ago for a reason. And my mother raised me not to entertain these things because she knew since I was a child that I had these kind of things going on. And she always told me to never just entertain it. Do not entertain it. Never give it any energy. And I don't think that was entirely right, because I think maybe these young men needed some prayers. And when I asked them who they were, I'll tell the story, all right? I got to tell a story for those that are just tuning in. I'll copy a link to the original. I told this story about 3 years ago. And I'll put a link to that story in the description if you want to see the original story. This happened about 20 years ago in Fort Drum. I was 14 years active duty. Then I got out, went to college to get my degree, which I did, and to teach. And I joined the New York Army National Guard, spent the last 6 years of my 20-year Army career in the New York Army National Guard while I was going to college. And I was a tank platoon sergeant, M1 tank platoon sergeant. And so we were out in the field. Just that year we were doing gunnery. And this happened around June, by the way, that we were in the field and just parked in our tanks, and we were going to the range, and we'd fire off the cannons and we'd fire off our machine guns. That is, to qualify, you know, you had to shoot, you had to score a certain, you know, like you had to show proficiency with your weapons, you know, to say you're qualified, which we did. But we weren't really, we were parked in the same area in like a grassy, semi-wooded area out on Fort Drum, which Fort Drum has 117,000 acres on Fort Drum. It's a very, very big Army post. That's to say, the land is not really good for farming. It's just sandy with good limestone. If you want to get limestone to build a castle, they got some of the best limestone on earth right up there in that part of New York State. Up in the Fort Drum's located up in the northwestern corner along where it meets Canada and Thousand Islands. But you dig down just so far and you hit solid limestone. And there's no mountains to speak of. It's just flat, undistinguished land. So you put an army post on it because the United States, you know, they want to make a dime off every inch of land we have here. So if you can't do anything, if you can't farm with it, but it's got streams and mountains, you make a state park out of it. If it doesn't have stream and mountains and you can't farm on it, you put an army post on it. And that's, you get Fort Drum, 117,000 acres. So we're parked up in this grassy area in our tanks, in one tanks, our battalion. That's to say there must have been 16 tanks, maybe something like that. And, you know, we're just getting ready to go to the range and trying to do real well at the range, you know, at the tank range, gunnery range. Drive our tanks up to the range, fire during the day or night, and come back and clean things up and, you know, just stay in the area, chill out a lot, train some. So I'm in this area with my tanks, and here's a picture of me to put things in perspective. This is me 20 years ago from the date of this. 21 years ago, actually. Yep, thinner, younger, very tired. I was a tank platoon sergeant and a tank commander there. And my loader, Sean McDonough, took that picture, and I took a picture of him. And we were just sitting there talking, you know, tank was turned off. We're chilling out. It was a morning, as I recall. So this picture was taken at the very time and place that this event happened, the haunting. Picture off. So while I was in this area, 3 spirits of 3 soldiers, dressed in contemporary for the times, that's to say BDU uniforms, which was, BDUs were kind of in from the early 80s up to about 2004, and they phased them out. So that kind of helps me narrow down the date of these soldiers. And these 3 guys would show up to me just like this. Here's a drawing I did of them. I'm not an artist, but I actually got this right, honestly. I got the look on their faces right. This is actually pretty accurate of how they appeared to me. You know, considering I'm not an artist, but this is really how they looked. And they would just stare at me. And they looked kind of curious. If anything, blank look on their faces. And if anything, they look curious, and they'd just stare at me. And they'd be about 10 feet away. And they would just materialize. And I could be, quite often, it was about 3 times a day these guys would appear to me over a period of about a week out in this one area where we were at. And I thought I was losing my mind. It was extremely unsettling. But I was a leader there. I was a senior leader. And I didn't want anybody to know what I was seeing because they might have thought I was nuts. I didn't tell nobody about this for years, honestly. Until I was out and of the military, retired, I didn't bring this up because it was very unsettling to me. So these 3 guys would show up and they would look like this, but they were in color. They looked quite solid, quite alive in color. Only from the chest up. They were invisible from the chest down. So I didn't see any name tags or anything. But they were always in this order with the one guy on top, and just like you're seeing them here in this order. I'm not bringing race up anymore. All right, I'm not going to mention it. But this is how they looked. And picture off. So they would show up to me 3 times a day as usual. I didn't know when they were going to. They would just materialize in and they would just stare at me right in front of me. One time I was in a leader meeting. That's to say, all the senior leaders, which I was a lower level senior leader in our battalion. I wasn't upper, I wasn't like a colonel or anything. I was a platoon sergeant. And so I'd show up, I was at a leader meeting, and these guys showed up right in the middle of a leader meeting. And I'm like, I just kind of look away from them, and I did my best not to betray to anybody what was going on. And I guess I did pretty well. Nobody said anything. I did have something happen while I was out there that kind of freaked a guy out. It had nothing to do with those guys. I've never had this happen before. I read this guy's mind. I just knew what I told him what he was thinking, and I don't know why. I could just, it blew him away. And this guy outranked me by a stripe, and he really he freaked out. He says, "I'm not messing with you, man." He really weirded out on that. I told him something from his past that he was thinking about, and I won't say what it was. It wasn't anything bad. It had to do with a rock concert, an old concert. And I said, "You were at this concert and this and that happened to you while you were there." And he's like, "How'd you know that?" I said, "I don't know." And he says, "Man, I'm not messing with you." And I just kept walking. I was just walking by, and he was talking, I just said that to that guy. And I was kind of very clairvoyant or something psychic. I don't know what you call it. I don't know. I wasn't trying to be. I didn't want to be. I just wanted to get the job done safely. These things just happen. So these 3 soldiers would show up to me 3 times a day or so, and they would stare at me. And I thought for a while, for a few days, I don't know if you ever had the feeling that you're losing your mind. I'll tell you what, I think it's worse feeling than thinking your health is going physically, to think that your mind is slipping. It's an awful feeling if you think you are losing your mind. And I thought I was losing my mind. And then I thought about it after a few days. I thought, I can't be imagining this. I already knew that I was prone to see spirits. But I never had them show up like that, you know. 3 guys, the same 3. And I thought, well, I'm seeing them in detail. They look the same every day. They look squared away. They look like young men, about 20, thin and shaped, like active duty soldiers, 20 years old. Their uniforms look good. Their haircuts look good from a platoon sergeant's perspective. And they looked like they were really in good, like professional young soldiers, you know? And active duty type that do this stuff 7 days a week, you know, professional soldiers, young guys, and, 20-ish. And I thought, I don't think I'm losing my mind. I said, what have I got to lose? Next time they show up and nobody's around, because sometimes they'd show up, nobody's around, sometimes they'd show up, people are around. Next time they show up and nobody's around, I'm going to challenge them. I'm going to ask them who they are. I figured I had nothing to lose, you know. So that did happen. I was in my tank alone. The tank was turned off. It's parked on this old, like a trail, a dirt trail, that, you know, a tank trail. And it was turned off, and the crew of my tank were off doing something else somewhere. So I was in the tank alone. And, you know, it was like about 10 o'clock in the morning, as I recall. Sun's shining, mid to late June, about late June. You know, it was in June, which plays into this maybe. And I'm outside on top, like this is the top of the tank turret. Here's my little tank commander's hatch. And I remember I was smoking a cigarette, because I smoked back then, unfortunately. I quit right after that, pretty much. But I was smoking a cigarette, and those 3 soldiers, ghosts, show up again. Here's a picture of them again, just to put it in. They showed up again, just like that, but in color. You know, regular green BDU uniform. Right in front of me, in front of the tank turret. And I asked them, picture off. They showed up right in front of me, about from me to the camera, maybe a little farther away. And I said, who are you? Out loud. You know, looked right at him and said, who are you? And one of them spoke. And it was a young man's voice, and it was quite clear. It was just as clear as if the guy was standing in front of me talking. And he had a tone of voice like he was addressing a sergeant, which I was a sergeant, like he was reporting, kind of like a military official, like he's addressing a sergeant, you know. And he said their unit, which I remembered was an artillery unit, but I forgot what the name of the artillery, like I was in Delta Company, 1st 127th Armor, but I forgot the numbers and all that on his. And over the years, I tried to forget this, honestly. And he says, artillery unit. He says, killed not far from here. Vehicle rollover. Training accident. That's what he said. Artillery unit. He said, artillery. And he said, killed not far from here. Vehicle rollover. Training accident. That's what he said. I don't know which one of them said it either. I could hear them, but I didn't see any movement. And I know what their artillery unit, I found out last week, after 21 years, I found out. And it was Echo Company, Battery, Company's Infantry, Battery's Artillery. He said, Echo Battery, 7th Artillery, killed not far from here. Vehicle rollover, training accident. And I said, well, go away. I said, leave me alone. And with that, they didn't move, they just backed off, and they just vanished. And I never saw them again. And I'm sorry, I should have prayed for them. I should have said, what can I do? I should have done something. You know, go to the light. Lord said a prayer to Jesus Christ to go to them, to administer them. The light of the Lord shine upon them and show them the way home. They read, something to that effect. I should have prayed for them. But I was quite disturbed by their presence. And my mom always told me not to entertain these things. And I didn't think I should be communicating with things as my Christian perspective. But I challenged them just to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind, and I wasn't. So they backed off and they vanished. I never saw them again. I never told anybody about this for some years later. And there were 3 of them. And I looked and looked and looked to try to find out, over the years, to try to find out who they were. You know, to try to find some artillery soldiers killed on Fort Drum in a training accident to validate the experience. And I couldn't find anything. Nothing. Over the years, not a thing. And that's odd because I was in some training accidents. A lot of soldiers in the Army get killed in training a lot. And when soldiers get killed in wartime, they get Memorial Day to be remembered forever by our nation. As long as we have a nation, we remember our fallen in war. But thousands of soldiers and sailors and airmen die in training accidents, suicides, all kinds of things. You know, in the line of duty, or maybe die of their injuries or suicide from their line of duty, but they die because of their military experiences, not in wartime, and they are forgotten. And I say Veterans Day, which was last week from today, when I made this to honor them, should be the day when we remember our soldiers and sailors, Marines, airmen, who died while serving this country in peacetime, and thousands, many thousands too. And the Army doesn't like to admit, I can speak for the Army, I was in 20 years, and I knew a lot of guys killed in the Army in training. I even found a few of them. Even. It happens. And I came pretty close to being killed, I don't know how many times, in the Army. Being that I was a paratrooper, infantryman, then on into tanks were dangerous. Everything you do in the Army, I did a lot of praying. You know, nobody in I was in charge of, nobody in my group of people ever even got hurt. But you better believe Sergeant Shank, Corporal Shank, Private Shank, through the years, I prayed to God, and I had faith in God. I remember I'd say my prayers to God, and then I would let it rest. And it's in His hands, and I would just do our job. And nobody with me ever got hurt. Nobody. But a lot of guys were hurt, and a lot of guys were killed in my battalion, in my company even, but not in my platoon. So, where am I going with this? Oh, I was in a helicopter crash years ago in the Army where a lot of guys were killed, and I told a story about that. There's a ghost story in that. Miracle story. I've got it posted on my helicopter crash story. And you could I could look that up on the internet. And that happened 10 years before these guys got killed. And you can find all kinds of things about that on the internet. But these guys got killed, I can't find a thing about it. You know, and for some reason, a week ago, I'd given up looking. I gave up looking, but for some reason a week ago, something jangled my mind to look one more time. I think it was because of Veterans Day. And I found something online, and here it is. That's the site right there. And final roll call for 10th Mountain Division. And I thought, well, maybe they're on this. You know, I never saw this before. So I scrolled down, and this is what I found on this. And if you look in the upper left corner, you see Garrison, Field and Garrison. That means, you know, soldiers that died while they're in garrison. Garrison means the barracks area, where generally it's either murder or suicide. Somebody dies in the garrison. Usually a suicide. Usually. In the field, it's usually a training accident. That's out in the woods. You know, playing with guns and vehicles, tanks, helicopters, all that stuff. Playing Army and all day and all night, all weather. And those fatalities are training accidents. Field. So I knew to click on this because my soldiers that had appeared to me 21 years ago told me that they died in a training accident, a vehicle rollover, and that they were artillery unit, right? And Fort Drum is an infantry post. There's not a lot of artillerymen on Fort Drum. You know, it's an infantry division, 10th Mountain Division. Picture off. Every infantry division has an artillery, generally a light artillery attachment to it, you know, to support them in combat. But generally, most of the 10th Mountain Division is infantry. So there are some artillerymen, but not many. So I knew I was looking for artillerymen. So I clicked on this and I started looking in the 1990s to 2000. Because this happened in 2001, I believe, 2001, when this happened. And I kept scrolling through, and there was a lot of soldiers killed. Man, I was amazed how many soldiers died in training accidents on Fort Drum. A lot. A lot. And I just about gave up. I got to 1996, and I found this. Lo and behold, four young artillerymen, 19, 20 years old, killed in the field. It says near Fort Drum. It means out in the field. 117,000 acre post. 4 young artillerymen were killed June 22nd, 1996. And I'm not going to bring race into this, but the names kind of add up into what I saw. I'll just say that. Now here's where I made a mistake on my video. The other reason I'm remaking this. I said that I saw 3 ghost soldiers. I didn't see 4. Maybe the spirit of the 4th, who knows, hopefully went on to the Lord or wasn't held up. I don't know. I don't need to know. But I made a mistake, because if I would have scrolled up a little higher in the next echelon above this row, I would have found one other guy that was killed. And there were 5 artillerymen killed that day on Fort Drum, June 22nd, 1996. So I left one of the guys out. There were 5 men killed that day. And when I found this, I had a picture off. I don't know if I had a picture on, but I lost track. When I found this, you better believe, it was like when I found earlier this year that crash. I finally found it. The jet that crashed, the Air Force jet that crashed when I was 7 years old in California, and the spirits on the Air Force jet were calling to me for help. And I found them. I found their crash. I made a video of it. I found out who they were. And I gave tribute to them, and I got some closure. And maybe they did. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't claim to know. What is time? You know, when you're dead, there's no time. But that's why I got to get this done, because I got to tell you something. I looked up the other day, everybody I knew like 30 years ago, and the guys that were older than me then, they were Vietnam vets, and they're all dead now. They all died. 2021 was a bad year for, I don't know, a bad year, but they passed on 2021, all of them. Man, life is short. And we're here, we wander around, we live our little life, you know, make our noise, you know, grow old maybe, you know, and then we're gone, just gone, forgotten. And I don't know, I just felt like I had to do this video, and I'm digressing a lot, but I've got a lot I want to say, and it's not scripted. So there were 5 of them that died that day, and I had a big moment like, whoa. I didn't think I was imagining this years ago, because like I said, I confronted them and they spoke to me and told me they were, you know, you said Echo Battery, 7th Artillery, killed not far from here, vehicle rollover. And, you know, that happens. Vehicle rollover, it's dangerous. You drive at night, and the Army trains at night, particularly 10th Mountain Division. They like to say they own the night. And you don't like drive around on those roads with your headlights on. You won't do that in a combat zone, for sure. You drive around with all your lights off, and your driver maybe has some night vision goggles on. Everything's lit up kind of a glowy green. You've seen it before somewhere. I gotta tell you, your depth those things work pretty good sometimes, but your depth perception is like almost nothing. And with night vision goggles on, or at least it used to be. And I'll speak for that because I know what these guys were using. And your depth perception is almost nothing of what these guys would have been driving with. In artillery, they probably were towing an artillery piece on a Humvee, and there's probably a lot of guys in the back of it trying to sleep. You know, it might have been 3 or 4 in the morning. And the sergeant in charge was probably nodding off, or who knows, maybe talking. And the driver was probably sleepy. You get really tired, and they're all like 19 years old to begin with. You're not a good driver to begin with. You know, young, but you're not very experienced at driving. And it doesn't take much. And there's a lot of roads around there. I know this because my tank almost went off in broad daylight, where the dirt trail's there and it just drops. And maybe my tank almost went off in one place around there. And I was really, I was sticking out the tank, and like if this is the edge, my driver kept going closer, and my tank, half of my tank track was almost off. We almost rolled over ourselves. And I didn't want to say anything abrupt because I was afraid if he made the wrong move, we were going to go over. I might have been killed too. Vehicle rollover. And I said, all right, his name was Glenn. I said his name. We're all good friends in my tank. I said, go left. Usually I'd say bump left, bump left. But I wanted to make sure. I said, go left. I didn't tell him that we're almost about ready to go over a ledge in a 62-ton tank. And he corrected it, and I never even told him that we almost went off a ledge. So, you know, these guys probably rolling along, towing an artillery piece, maybe a cargo. Artillery pieces have a lot of camo netting. Sometimes artillerymen like to lay up on the camo netting. It's like a bed. And so the truck's rolling along with a trailer with artillery netting, or maybe an artillery piece. The guys are sleeping, and suddenly it rolls over. And I'm talking a lot of tons, rolls over, and people are going to be mangled. And that's what this guy said. One of them spoke. Echo Battery, 7th Artillery, vehicle rollover, killed, not far from here. Oh, was it? Echo Battery, 7th Artillery, vehicle rollover, killed, not far from here. Vehicle rollover, training accident. So that's that. So these guys were killed, 5 of them, the same day, June 22nd, 1996, on Fort Drum, in a vehicle rollover. How do I know that? Because I found this site that says they died June 22nd, 1996, but it doesn't say how they died. But I know how they died because they told me. One of them told me. Vehicle rollover. So I called the 10th Mountain Division Historical Society. Every division has a historian and a museum. And 10th Mountain Division goes back to World War II. They got quite a lineage, you know. And I got the guy on the phone, and it's a civilian, and it's his job, federal job. He's a historian for the 10th Mountain Division. And I didn't tell him my ghost story. I just said I served back in the 90s and early 2000s, and I said there were some guys here that were killed in a training accident in 1996. I wondered if you could look up some information on them for Veterans Day. You know what he said to me on the phone? He says, yeah, I don't know anything about that. He should know something about it. He said he didn't know anything about it. I said, well, could you look into it? You know, he's the historian. He's got everything there. He says, well, I could look in the archives. He says, but that would take me hours. And I felt like reaching through that phone and grabbing him. Because, you know, it's just, why don't he just say, yeah, I could do that, but it would take a while and I don't feel like it. I really felt like grabbing this guy by his collar through that phone, you know. I said, no, don't worry about it. You know, I'll look into it. And, okay, that's it. And I looked into it. I couldn't find a thing on these guys. Nothing. Nothing. And there should be something. Like I said, I was killed in a helicopter, or not, I was killed. I was on a helicopter crash before these guys. A lot of guys were killed. I almost was. You can find all kinds of stuff on that. So I wonder if Fort Drum tried to cover it up and say these guys died some other way. Because I'll tell you something, digging through that site where I found them, I had a lot. Fort Drum was losing a lot of guys in training accidents. One here, one there, one here, one there. And there's suicides that happen when young men, when their girlfriends break up with them, they come out of the field, find somebody with their wife. You know, they don't, Army military tries to keep that hushed up because that's pretty bad PR, but it happens a lot. So they had a lot of fatalities, I can tell you that. And if you find this site, you can look it up and look for yourself. You know, I think I've given you enough information. You know, final roll call, you could find this for 10th Mountain Division. And that wouldn't surprise me if their CG, which is the commanding general of the post in 1996, didn't want it to get out that he just had 5 brand new soldiers killed. All these guys were privates. Every one of them was a private. Some of them were just E2s. E2 is like basic training. These guys just got out of basic training. You know, they might have been in that unit for 2 months. 5 brand new Army soldiers killed in a training accident. That is a surefire way for a top brass commanding general or sergeant major to get their precious military career red flagged. Like no more promotions and send them off to Alaska somewhere. You know, because wartime's one thing, but in peacetime, if you start losing a lot of soldiers to suicides, training accidents, you got a lot of AWOLs, crime going on, it looks real bad for the commanding general. And that's a big red flag on his career. So, I'm not saying he did, I don't know. But I can tell you this, I couldn't find a thing on these guys. Not in the military, there's no record of these guys. I've seen record of them, obviously, that they served and they died, but no record of how they died. And I looked at the state, I looked at Watertown's newspaper archives, I couldn't find a thing on them. And I should have been able to, but I didn't. Watertown is a small city right next to Fort Drum, New York. I looked up these guys as their hometown. One was from El Paso. I looked all over in their archives, obituaries, or state death records, nothing on these guys. 2 guys I did find something on. PFC Imran Malik from my old hometown, which is Woodbridge, Virginia. That's where my parents were living when I was born in Fredericksburg. I was living in Woodbridge. But I found this on him. And really not much. That's all I could find on this guy. Not much at all. You know, we're here and we're gone, you know. But that's the way it is, isn't it? And then I found this on Hernandez. Jose, it's odd there are 2 Jose and Hernandez. Jose A. Hernandez. One was from El Paso, Texas. I couldn't find a thing on him. And I looked hard. And one was from Puerto Rico. And I found this on him. And that's all it says. It doesn't say, it acknowledges that he joined the military and he either died or he became a casualty. You know, you can read it. It's kind of really lame the way they worded it. That's all they had on him. The other 3 guys, I couldn't find anything anywhere. Nothing. Picture off. Nothing. And I could find no record anywhere that 5 men died in a training accident on June 22nd, 1996. And I should have. So it makes me wonder if they covered it up. Maybe these guys wanted their story told. I don't know. Well, I'm telling it. I don't know the facts. I don't. But I'm just telling you, these 5 soldiers died in a vehicle rollover in a training accident on Fort Drum that day, June 22nd. And the Army has no record of that I can find. It wouldn't be the first time. I knew a guy, oh God, I don't know how to bring this up. A guy I served with, Captain Hess, around about the same time. He was killed on Fort Knox, Kentucky, and the Army covered that up big time. He was stabbed like 27 times, something like that. He was out running in the morning, and somebody murdered him. And his wife fought that. Here's a picture of him and his wife. That's him when he was enlisted. He went officer and he became a captain. And he was murdered. And the Army tried to say it was a suicide. And this went, actually, his wife fought it, to her credit. And she got a lot of private investigators that argued it. And said there was no way this was a suicide. You don't stab yourself 27 times, like, you know, and wind up in a ditch somewhere. The Army didn't want to admit, the commanding general at Fort Knox in that year didn't want it known that he had a gang crime problem on Fort Knox, Kentucky. So they called it a suicide because it would look bad. It would probably be a red flag item on his precious military career. So this is a guy I knew, and he was a very, very good man and a good officer. A kind, upbeat, positive, this guy just exuded positivity. And very soft-spoken too. Good man. Quite a shock. But I'm picture off if I hadn't taken it off. Lost track again. But they tried to cover that up, and his wife fought it, and it even went to CNN. It made national news for a couple of years, and I think she won. But they tried to cover that up, so why wouldn't they try to cover up that they just had 5 brand new soldiers killed in a vehicle rollover? Which these things happen, but it is preventable to a degree. So maybe they wanted me to tell their story. And so I'm telling you, and I don't want any, I'm just doing this because they came to me 21 years ago for some reason to tell me that they died in a vehicle rollover there. Would have been 4 or 5 years before. Pretty much the same time, like the anniversary time period of it. So that's all I got to say about this. And I've gone on for a while, but I don't care. I'm going to give them a little tribute. I'm going to read their names off. I mean, I can't fit in my Army uniform anymore, guys. I'm sorry. You know, I used to do military funerals with a send-off of the rifles and taps and all. Long time ago when I was a lot younger, a lot thinner. I'm no longer in the Army. Neither are they, but from, you know, it's just weird because it's a weird story. It's a ghost story of sorts. But 3 of these guys came to me, and I could still hear his voice. A young man. He sounded as clear as I'm talking to you. It wasn't like a spooky thing. It wasn't at all. He's quite clear when he spoke. The young man's voice that told me, Echo Battery, 7th Artillery. Vehicle rollover, killed in a training accident. Killed not far from here. He said, Echo Battery, 7th Artillery, killed not far from here. Vehicle rollover, training accident. That's what he said. So I'm going to read their names and I'm going to play some taps and something for them. This is my send-off, telling their story, all right? And for them, I'm going to say a prayer also. And I really don't know how to pray for people like this. I'm not a priest. Okay, so PFC Brandon B. Carter. That's the one that I forgot. And I just found him last night. The 5th one that I forgot. PFC Brandon B. Carter, 20, from McLean, Virginia. PFC Imran Malik, 19, from Woodbridge, Virginia. God, I'm sorry. Private Jose A. Hernandez, 19, from El Paso, Texas. Private Jose Hernandez-Vega, 21, of Yacao, Puerto Rico. Private Mark N. Salisbury, 19, from St. Paul, Minnesota. All right. Roll some of these out. Go away, puppy. sings along, he sings along. I don't know.
Keep showing.
Almighty Father in heaven, I pray to you today to be with these soldiers. I didn't know them personally, but you knew them, Lord. May your holy light of love and mercy and grace shine upon them forever and always. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, I pray, amen. Amen. All right. Hopefully that brings some closure. Hope you sounded great. Better than my playing. I missed a few notes. Hello, I've got to clarify a statement I made in a video about the 5 soldiers who were killed at Fort Drum, June 22nd, 1996, when I said in the video that I was in a helicopter crash. You know, I go through and edit these things, and if I make a mistake or I say something that isn't, you know, accurate by accident, you know, I try to correct it, or I'll remake the whole video. But in this case, I'm just going to tack this on. I was not in a helicopter crash. I was involved in one in a way. I made a video about it 2-3 years ago. What happened 10 years before, about 10 years before these soldiers were killed, I was in the 82nd, I was a squad leader. That is to say, I was the leader of a 9-man infantry squad and the paratroopers. And there was helicopters, UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. About 6 or 7 of them were coming in, and they'd land in a field, and we'd load up. You know, there was quite a few of us, so they were going all day, then they'd take off, and they'd bring us back towards Garrison. And they'd come back in and pick up another bunch of guys. And we were out there all day. It was a sunny day, summer day, and seems like I recall. And actually, I don't know what time of the year it was, but it was a sunny day. And we loaded up, and our turn came, and we all ran out there, you know, in our helmets and our rifles and stuff, and loaded up on the helicopters, and the doors were left open, you know, on the side of it. And I made a remark to one of my sergeants in my squad. I said the motor sounded funny on the one we were on. It had kind of a weird pitch to the turbines, because they didn't shut them off. They kept them running. When they landed, they kept them running so they could take right off as soon as we were loaded up. You know, and the guy agreed. And we really didn't think anything of it. And so we're getting ready, in a minute or two, we're going to take off, you know, and go back to Garrison. We've been out in the field for a while. And so right before it took off, a staff sergeant, I've never seen a man before or since, got on the helicopter and said to me, because I was the lead guy on there, there was a 9-man infantry squad, and then the helicopter had a 3-man crew, so 11 total on the helicopter. And he said to me, he said, there's been a change. You know, he's yelling over the sound of those things are pretty loud when you're inside of them, the turbine and everything. He said, there's been a change. He says, you and your squad are to get off and load up the next one behind this one, you know. And so, you know, what are you going to do? You know, so I got off the helicopter, my squad and myself got off, and 9 other infantry soldiers, I think, in our company. I didn't know I knew a couple of these guys. I didn't know all of them very well. They weren't my platoon. And it seems like they were in 3rd platoon. I was in 1st, I think. And they loaded up and took our seats. Unlucky for them. And we loaded up another helicopter and we all took off, 7 helicopters. Really cool, kind of fun ride. You know, nap of the earth, that means right over the treetops real fast. I think those things went about 200 miles an hour or something, I don't know. And the one that we were on originally crashed. Everybody was killed. Big fireball. You know, everybody was instantly killed, is my understanding. So yeah, it wasn't my time to die yet that day, apparently, or the other guys in my squad. And like I said, I did a lot of praying when I was in the infantry. You better believe it, because we did a lot of dangerous things. And there's a ghost story associated with that helicopter crash. One of the unfortunate soldiers in there, I know his name. I think I might have said it in the PFC Resnick. He returned to our barracks a couple times in uniform, and he looked well. He actually spoke briefly with somebody that knew him well, and the guy didn't think he was a ghost. The guy didn't know. The guy stayed behind. He didn't go with us to the field, and he didn't know that he heard about the helicopter crash, but he didn't know that this man was one of the ones that were killed. And this guy showed up to our barracks before we got there. And he was friends with this man, a sergeant at the CQ. And he came in and said, hello, how's it going? Pretty good. And the guy went upstairs and vanished. That really shook that man up hardcore, because the sergeant that encountered the guy didn't believe in ghosts. So it really blew his mind. And he was also friends with this guy. So it's not like he would have mistaken him for someone else. And I remember that guy wasn't the same for, I think I knew him for 2 years. He just kept saying over and over, but I saw him. He was alive, you know. He couldn't get his head around it. So that's what that was about. And, you know, if I Google that event today, all these years later, many years later, you know, I can still find quite a bit on that event, that helicopter crash with 11 guys killed. 9-man squad, 3-man helicopter crew. Went up in a ball of flames, the whole thing just disintegrated. So they died quick, at least. You can find a lot on that. And so when in the military, when people are killed in like a helicopter or a plane or a jet crash, it makes the news all over the place. But like these 5 unfortunate young men, artillery soldiers that I'm talking about, 3 of which came to me, I think they wanted their story told. You know, the spirits wanted their story told, because I can't find anything on their deaths. And 5 men were killed in one accident that day, June 22nd, 1996. And you can't find a thing on it. The 10th Mountain Division Museum, they should know something about it. That's the man's job, you know. And I mean, they're right there. And no, I don't know anything about it. I said, well, could you look into it? Yeah, I could look into the archives, but he told me that would take hours. He didn't want to be bothered. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe it was covered up or something. I don't know. I don't know. All I know is what I've presented to you on this video, and I'm telling this not so much to entertain, because I rather doubt many people are going to watch this whole long video on this, but I'm doing this for them, because after all these years I can still see them in my mind and hear that young man's voice when he said Echo Battery 7th Artillery, you know, killed not far from here, vehicle rollover, training accident. And it just I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Sometimes it took me all these years to put it together that apparently they wanted it known that they were killed in a vehicle rollover. So I'm telling you right now, it's going on in the World Wide Web. I mean, there's an outside chance that they weren't, but myself, my money's on that they were, that these were 5 men were killed. The 3 ghost soldiers that appeared to me were among these 5 unfortunate young men, 20-ish, that were killed that day. All right, thank you, and God bless each of you. And hope someday we won't need armies and all these things, you know, when the Lord returns. So say a prayer for them, light a candle if you want. Remember them on Veterans Day. Thank you.